Welcome to One Shot Stories, where we dive into events so bizarre, brutal, catastrophic, gruesome, and everything in between. Some of these events made an impact on history, our society, or our lives directly. We unpack stories that will have or have made a permanent mark after just one moment or decision. One time is all it takes. Today, we'll be discussing how Hurricane Katrina was formed, when it made landfall, and could more have been done prior to Katrina's impact. Hurricane Katrina was formed on August 23rd, 2005, as a tropical depression over the Bahamas. The storm's formation was a result of the interaction between a tropical wave and the remnants of previous Tropical Depression 10. On August 23rd, the disturbance organized to Tropical Depression 12 over the southeast Bahamas, strengthening into Tropical Storm Katrina on the morning of August 28th. On August 27th, the storm reached Category 3 intensity on the hurricane wind scale, becoming the third major hurricane of the season. An eyewall replacement cycle disrupted the intensification but caused the storm to nearly double in size. Thereafter, Katrina rapidly intensified over the unusually warm waters of the Loop Current, from a Category 3 to a Category 5 hurricane in just 9 hours. The morning of August 28th, Katrina was a Category 5 hurricane, reaching its max peak strength at 6 p.m., with max sustained winds of 175 miles per hour. The pressure measurement made Katrina the fifth most intense Atlantic hurricane. Rita and Wilma would come later in the season. It was also the strongest hurricane ever recorded in the Gulf of Mexico at that time, before Rita broke the record. Katrina weakened due to another eyewall replacement cycle. It made its second landfall at 11 a.m. on August 29th as a high-end Category 3 hurricane with sustained winds of 125 miles per hour in Louisiana. At landfall, hurricane force would be felt 125 miles from the center. After moving over southeastern Louisiana in Brenton Sound, it made its third and final landfall near the Louisiana-Mississippi border with 120 miles per hour sustained winds. Still a mid-range strength, Category 3 intensity hurricane. Katrina maintained strength well into Mississippi, finally losing strength more than 150 miles inland in Meridian, Mississippi, downgrading to a tropical depression near Clarksville, Tennessee. Its remnants were absorbed by a cold front in the eastern Great Lakes region on August 31st. The resultant extratropical storm moved rapidly to the northeast and affected eastern Canada. As the eye of Katrina crossed to the northeast, it caused hurricane conditions for hours. Storm surge caused 53 levee and system failures in the federally built levee system, protecting Metro New Orleans. Failures occurred in New Orleans and surrounding communities, especially St. Bernard Parish. The MRGO breached its levees in 20 places, flooding much of eastern New Orleans. The major levee breaches in the city included breaches at 17th Street, London Ave, and the wide industrial canal that left 80% of the city flooded. Most major roads traveling in and out of the city were damaged. The only working highway routes were westbound Crescent City Connection and the Huey P. Long Bridge, and a large portion of the I-10 Twin Span Bridge traveling eastbound towards Slidell, Louisiana had collapsed. Both Lake Pontchartrain Causeway and Crescent City Connection only carried emergency traffic. Access to downtown New Orleans and the shelter of the last resort at the convention center was never closed because River Road in Jefferson Parish and Lehigh Avenue in New Orleans were not flooded and would have allowed access throughout the immediate post-storm emergency period. The first reports of death reported from the city were reported shortly before midnight, August 28th. 3 nursing home patients passed away during evacuation in Baton Rouge. Estimated 250 bodies were found in nursing homes and hospitals in New Orleans, the largest number at Memorial Medical Center, where corpses were recovered. 200 patients at Charity Hospital weren't evacuated until Friday, September 2nd, without power or fresh water for 5 days. The Superdome, which was sheltering many people who had not evacuated, sustained significant damage. Two sections of the Superdome's roof were damaged, and the dome's waterproof membrane peeled off. Levee breaches in New Orleans also caused significant deaths, with over 700 bodies recovered in New Orleans by October 23, 2005. Survivors report seeing dead bodies lying in the streets and floating in the still flooded sections of the city, especially in the east of the city. There were 6 deaths at the Superdome, 4 from natural causes, one was an OD, and the other was they took their own life. 4 bodies were recovered from the convention center. One of the 4 is believed to be a homicide. Evidence shows even the prisoners were abandoned during Katrina. While the guards sought shelter, hundreds of prisoners were registered as unaccounted for once the storm had passed. The Gulf of Mississippi suffered extensive damage from Katrina's impact on August 29th, leaving 238 people unalive, 67 missing, and billions in damage. Bridges, barges, boats, piers, houses, and cars were washed inland. Katrina traveled up an entire state. As a result, all 82 counties in Mississippi were declared disasters for federal assistance, 47 of those counties for full assistance. After Katrina made a brief initial landfall in Louisiana, Katrina made its final landfall near the state line, and the eye wall passed over cities of Bay St. Louis and Waveland as a Category 3 hurricane with sustained winds of 120 miles per hour. Katrina's right front quadrant passed over the westland central Mississippi coast, causing a powerful 27-foot storm surge, penetrating 6 miles inland, in many areas up to 12 miles inland, along bays and rivers. In some areas, the surge crossed Interstate 10 for several miles. Katrina caused 11 tornadoes in Mississippi alone. On August 29th, some beachfront neighborhoods were completely leveled. Mississippi officials calculated 90% of structures within half-mile from the coastline were completely destroyed. Storm surge traveled as much as 6 miles inland in portions of state coast. One apartment complex with 30 residents seeking shelter inside collapsed. Several casinos in the state, which were floated on barges to comply with Mississippi land-based gambling laws, were washed hundreds of yards inland by waves. A number of streets and bridges were washed away. On U.S. Highway 90 along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, 2 major bridges were completely destroyed. The Bay St. Louis Pass Christian Bridge, eastbound spar of 110 Bridge over the Pascagoula River estuary was damaged. All 3 coastal counties of the state were severely affected by the storm. Katrina's surge was most extensive as well as the highest in the documented history of the United States. Large portions of Hancock, Harrison, and Jackson counties were inundated by the storm surge, in all 3 cases affecting most populated areas. Surge covered almost the entire lower half of Hancock County, destroying the coastal communities of Clermont Harbor and Waveland, much of Bay St. Louis, and flowed up the Jordan River, flooding Diamond Head and Kearney. Harrison County, past Christian, was completely inundated. Along the narrow strip of land to the east along the coast, which included the cities Long Beach and Gulfport. Flooding was more extensive in communities such as Duberville, which borders Back Bay. Biloxi, on peninsula between the Back Bay and the coast, was particularly hard hit, especially in low-lying Point's Cadent area. All 3 coastal counties of the state were severely affected by the storm. Katrina's surge was most extensive, as well as highest, in the documented history of the United States. Large portions of Hancock, Harrison, and Jackson counties were inundated by the storm surge, and all 3 cases affected most populated areas. Surge covered almost the entire lower half of Hancock County, destroying the coastal communities of Clermont Harbor and Waveland, much of Bay St. Louis, and flowed up the Jordan River, flooding Diamond Head and Kiln. Harrison County, past Christian, was completely inundated, along with a narrow strip of land to the east along the coast, which includes the cities Long Beach and Gulfport. Flooding was more extensive in communities such as Duberville, which borders Back Bay, Biloxi, on peninsula between the Back Bay and the coast, was particularly hard hit, especially the low-lying Point Cadet area. In Jackson County, storm surge flowed up the Wide River estuary, with the combined surge and freshwater flooding cutting the county in half. Over 90% of Pascagoula, the easternmost coastal city in Mississippi and about 70 miles east of Katrina's landfall near the Louisiana Mississippi border, was flooded from storm surge at the height of the storm. Other large Jackson County neighborhoods, such as Port Bay and Gulf Hills, were seriously damaged, with large portions being completely destroyed, and St. Martin was hard hit. Ocean Springs, Moss Point, Gautier also suffered major surge damage. Mississippi Emergency Management Agency officials also recorded deaths in Forest, Hinds, Warren, and Lehigh counties. Over 900,000 people throughout the state experienced power outages. Although Hurricane Katrina made landfall well to the west of Alabama and the Florida Panhandle, were both affected by tropical storm force winds and storm surge, varying from 12 to 16 feet around Mobile Bay, with higher waves up top. Sustained winds of up to 67 miles per hour were recorded in Mobile, Alabama, and storm surge of 12 feet. Surge caused significant flooding several miles inland along Mobile Bay. 4 tornadoes were also reported in Alabama. An oil rig under construction along the Mobile River broke its moon rings and floated 1.5 miles northward before striking the Cochrane Bridge just outside of Mobile. Damage on the Dupin Island was severe, with the surge destroying many houses and cutting a new canal through the western portion of the island. An offshore oil rig became grounded on the island. In Mississippi, the storm surge caused significant beach erosion along Alabama coastlines. More than 600,000 people lost power in Alabama. As a result of Hurricane Katrina, 2 people died in traffic accidents in the state. Residents were without power for several days. The aftermath of Hurricane Katrina was even more devastating. The Bush administration sought $105 billion for repairs and reconstruction in the region, which did not account for damage to the economy caused by potential interruption of the oil supply, destruction of the Gulf Coast highway infrastructure, and exports or commodities such as grain. Katrina damaged or destroyed 30 oil platforms and caused the closure of 9 refineries. The total shut-in oil production from Gulf of Mexico in the 6-month period following Katrina was approximately 24% of annual production. For the same period was 18%. 1.3 acres of forest land were destroyed. Hundreds of thousands of local residents were left without employment. Prior to the hurricane, the region supported approximately 1 million non-farm jobs, with 600,000 of them in New Orleans. The economic impact on Louisiana and Mississippi possibly exceeds $150 billion. Katrina displaced over 1 million people from central Gulf Coast to elsewhere across the United States, becoming the largest dysphoria in the history of the United States. By late January 2006, about 200,000 people were once again living in New Orleans, less than half the pre-storm population. Some insurance companies have stopped insuring homeowners in the area because of high costs from Hurricane Katrina and Rita, or raised insurance premiums to cover risks. As part of the cleanup effort, floodwaters that covered the New Orleans were pumped into Lake Pontchartrain, a process that took 43 days to complete. The residual water contained a mix of raw sewage, bacteria, heavy metals, pesticides, toxic chemicals, and oil, caused a large number of fish to die. It was described by scientists as being a toxic soup, and that's quoted. Thousands of National Guards and federal troops were mobilized and sent to Louisiana, with 7,841 in the area on August 29th, to a maximum of 46,838 on September 10th. A local number of law enforcement agents from across the country were temporarily deputized by the state. They have M16s and are locked and loaded. Those troops know how to shoot to kill, and I expect they will, Louisiana Governor Kathleen Blanco said. That's how the government thought about the displaced individuals. Several shootings occurred between police and New Orleans residents, some involving police misconduct, including an incident where police officers killed two unarmed civilians and seriously injured four others at Danziger Bridge. Five former police officers pleaded guilty to charges connecting to the Danziger Bridge shooting in the aftermath of the hurricane. Six former or existing officers appeared in court in June 2011. New Orleans Police Department confirmed that 12 police officers were participating in looting or property theft. FEMA provided housing assistance to more than 700,000 applicants, families, and individuals. However, only a fifth of trailers requested in New Orleans Parish were supplied, resulting in an enormous housing shortage in the city of New Orleans. Many local areas voted not to allow trailers. Many areas had no utilities, a requirement prior to placing the trailers. To provide additional housing, FEMA also paid for hotels of 12,000 individuals and family displaced by Hurricane Katrina through February 7, 2006, when a final deadline was set for the end of hotel cost coverage. Evacuees were still eligible to receive federal assistance, which could be used towards either an apartment rent, additional hotel stays, or fixing their ruined homes. Although FEMA no longer paid for hotels directly, as of March 30th, there were still 260 families living in FEMA-provided trailers in Louisiana and Mississippi. Within days of Katrina's landfall, public debate arose about the local, state, and federal government's role in the preparation and the response to the hurricane. Criticism prompted by televised images of residents who remained stranded by floodwaters without water, food, or shelter. Deaths from thirst, exhaustion, and violence days after the storm had passed fueled criticism, as did the dilemma of evacuees at facilities such as the Louisiana Superdome and New Orleans Civic Center. It's alleged race, class, and other factors could have contributed to delays in government response. A concert for hurricane relief, a benefit concert for victims of Hurricane Katrina, rapper Kanye West veered off script and harshly criticized the government response to the crisis, stating that George Bush don't like black people, and that is a quote. A congressional interrogation which found that FEMA and Red Cross did not have a logistic capacity sophisticated enough to fully support the massive number of Gulf Coast victims. Hurricane Katrina was the first natural disaster in the United States in which the American Red Cross used its Safe and Well Family Location website. Hurricane Katrina was the third time the Superdome had been used as emergency shelter during a hurricane. Both previous instances were for less than 2 days. Despite these previous periods of emergency use, as Katrina approached, the city officials had not stockpiled enough generator fuel, food, and other supplies to handle the needs of thousands of people seeking safety here. Over the years, officials have stressed they didn't want to make it too comfortable at the Superdome since it was always safer to leave the city altogether. It's not a hotel, said Emergency Preparedness Director of St. Tammany Parish to a newspaper. If running water and proper functioning facilities is a hotel, what would you call human decency? Is a question I often ask myself when I hear that. The Superdome was built to withstand most natural catastrophes. The roof was estimated to withstand wind speeds of up to 200 miles per hour, but no research was conducted to prove the claim to be accurate. Floodwaters were not expected to reach the second level, which was 35 feet from the ground. It was used as emergency shelter, although it was neither designed nor tested for the task. It is known that generators would not provide light or AC for the entire dome if power failed, and pumps providing water to the second level restrooms would not function. 10,000 residents and 150 National Guardsmen sheltered at the Superdome. Security checks were conducted. A number of people taking shelter rose to 15,000 to 20,000 as search and rescue teams brought more people from hard hit areas. On August 29th at 6:20 a.m., electric supply at the Superdome failed. The generator provided internal lighting but little else. The AC would no longer operate. The refrigeration system, which was keeping food from spoiling, was no longer in operation. Medical machines failed, so patients were relocated. Some couldn't leave because there wasn't enough transportation vehicles. At 9 a.m., reports from inside the dome said that part of the roof had torn off. The outside was visible from the inside, and rain was pouring in. There were two huge holes in the roof of the Superdome. The following day, the Louisiana National Guard delivered 3 truckloads of water and 7 truckloads of MREs, enough to supply 15,000 people for 3 days. FEMA promised 360,000 military rations. Only 40,000 arrived that day. There was no designated medical staff at work in the evacuation center, no sick bays within the Superdome, and very few cots available that hadn't been brought by evacuees. The mayor of New Orleans, Ray Nagin, stated that a refuge of last resort, only limited water and supplies would be provided. Evacuees were instructed to bring their own supplies, which often confused me because some people didn't escape with their lives, let alone to have enough time to rummage for supplies to evacuate. By August 30th, with no air conditioning, temperatures inside the Superdome had reached the 90s, and the punctured dome allowed air in and trapped it. Tempers began to flare as hunger and thirst deepened. Food rotted inside the hundreds of unpowered refrigerators and freezers. Blood and feces covered the walls. The smell inside was revolting due to the breakdown of the plumbing system, which included all of the facilities in the entire building, forcing people to urinate and defecate in other areas, such as garbage cans and sinks. Some people wore medical masks to ease the smell. August 31st, it was announced that the Superdome evacuees would be moved to the Astrodome in Houston. The state inside the Superdome deteriorated. Evacuees began to break into luxury suites and concession stands, vending machines, and offices looking for food and other supplies. People were taken a few at a time through the garage, then to trucks that plowed through 4 feet of water and shuttled to buses in unflooded areas. Ill patients were transported by military aircraft to Ellington Field Joint Reserve Base in Houston. Troopers smuggled non 30 Troopers smuggled 30 non-US citizens out of the dome. This was done covertly as possible so as to not cause rioting or charges of favoritism. On September 2nd, 475 buses were sent by FEMA to pick up evacuees from the dome and the convention center, where more than 20,000 people had been crowded in similar poor living conditions. 25,000 were taken to San Antonio and 25,000 to the Astrodome in Houston. They were given 3 meals per day and snack provided with hygiene supplies and allowed to use the locker room for showers. The last large group left the Superdome on September 3rd, 2005. And little information is known as to what happened with the missing, and there's still sites and things available today in 2025, almost exactly 20 years after Hurricane Katrina made landfall. And there's still victims out there. People are still suffering. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, leave a comment, and I hope to meet you back here for the next video.